Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate. Well, hello, everybody. Another week goes flashing by, and here we are. I appreciate your listenership. This is Rick Widener getting it right here on KNZZ KGLN. We're really trying to, get some news out to everybody that maybe you don't get every place else and talk a little bit about it. And it's given us plenty to talk about, that's for sure. What I wanted to bring up today, well, there's a number of things I have here on my notes, but what I really wanted to see was how many people out there, because this is a question I've been getting, think that by this time next year, something is going to happen that is monumental in terms of the Republic. Are we going to have some kind of change between the states? Are we going to try and have some reorganization? Are we going to have something where Donald Trump wins the election, but they won't let him take office? Are we going to, these are the kind of questions I get. All those are monumental things. And when I talk to people and they bring these things up, some of them are a little embarrassed. They're, I wouldn't think that, because you feel like you're some kind of conspiracy person. The problem is that just because you believe in a conspiracy doesn't mean there isn't one. And just because you think that things might not be going the right direction doesn't mean they aren't going in the right direction. So here we are, right? We're trying to figure out what we should do. At some point, you know what the country should probably do, but you'd like to know, what can I do? And, the most important thing to do, of course, is take charge of your local elections. I reel about that all the time. Mainly because we have so many local bodies here in Colorado, and wherever you're listening from, by the way, if you're listening on the internet or if you're listening to our podcast or whatever, it's in your area too, where people have become so obsessed and cross-eyed, essentially, about what's going on the national level, because it is so important and is because it's so unusual, that things in their own backyard start getting that far-away look, don't they? Well, that's not going to help anything. That stuff in your own backyard is really much more important to you in a daily basis, at least now. They could change. But usually it changes quickly when your city council or your county commissioners or does something like that, or the state does something, especially when you don't know about it. As I've said here many times, I've decided that the new approach to the news media is to just not tell you about it. If it's something they think that might rile you up, you don't need to know. Because remember, in the state I'm at, and by the way, there are several states like this, we have a kind of divide, and it's, interestingly enough, kind of goes along the continental divide. And that is that the western part of Colorado is substantially more conservative than the eastern side of Colorado. Now, there's some islands of crazyism: Aspen, Vail, Telluride, parts of La Plata County. I could probably name another one or two if I thought about it. For the most part, we have become sort of victims over here. Something happens in the Denver legislature, and the next year, here we are. We've got it affecting us. And how many times have I talked to everybody about the need to follow the news? Because if you don't follow it, no one's going to tell you about it. We're going to try to tell you about it here as much as possible. We can't control everything. And I don't expect you to find everything. It's just a matter of trying to stay up on a few things, especially things that you're particularly interested in. Let's say you're particularly interested in firearms. That's a good one, because our legislature is screwing around with firearms pretty much every time they get together. They have some new law, some new idea, some new approach, something. And a lot of these things are bad enough on their face, but if you really start looking at them, you realize that they're also calculated to have a bigger effect sort of sideways. Sideways, excuse me. For instance, one of the things that is in the legislature in Colorado right now is part of a bill wants to require firearm owners to have liability insurance. Well, a lot of you have liability insurance on your home or whatever, but does it cover something that happens with a firearm? I don't know. You'd have to go to your policy. And if it doesn't, like I suspect some of them may not, how much more are they going to charge you to cover your liability if something happens with a firearm? Especially since your liability seems to be escalating all of the time. It's so much easier to be found liable for things that people thought were just, I don't know, a constitutional right not that long ago. So what do you think? You think that's going to cost you some money? You think it might get to the point where maybe you can't get liability insurance or you can't afford liability insurance? Then what happens? The law requires you to have it. You're going to be outside the law. Does that mean you have to just give your guns away to somebody that does have liability insurance? I mean, is that what you really want? I don't think so. But that's what they want to do. They also want to put another bunch of requirements on concealed weapons permits so that you have more testing and more this and more that. It's not because they think that you don't know what you're doing. They just want to make it more difficult, more expensive. Most of you who have concealed weapon permits that I know are fairly proficient in the use of their firearms. There's always going to be somebody that has a firearm, and it doesn't matter if it's on his person or in their nightstand or whatever, that has not taken the time to learn how to use it properly. And that goes for anything. Somebody that doesn't drive a car very often can get in some real trouble, especially if something untoward happens. There's all sorts of things that we use or can use on a daily basis that we don't because the situations don't come up. And so it is understandable. There's going to be some times out there where people are going to have a firearm and they're going to attempt to use it to protect themselves. And because they have not trained with it, because they have not got themselves to be comfortable with it, they're going to have a problem. I don't think any amount of government intervention can really stop that outside of putting somebody through a regular course of fire to make sure that they can hit things that they shoot at, or, almost more importantly, that they can operate the firearm if it malfunctions, or in a way that does not let them have the firearm taken away from them and used against them. We'd all like to see that. But we also know that no matter what someone says about common sense firearm regulation, that has nothing to do with what the left wants. The common sense firearm regulation, even if it doesn't sound that bad, is just always the first kick on the door to knock over the Second Amendment. Unfortunately, there are many things that people talk about that most people that own firearms can get behind. Like, if you're crazy, probably not a great idea. Who gets to decide if you're crazy? And then how do you do it? These are very difficult questions. And if you let the wrong people decide that, it's going to be a real problem in terms of your rights. And remember, your right to self-protection does not come from the government. It comes from your human being. That's right. You're a human being, or should we say being, and each one of us is, when we come into this world, is imbued with a certain amount of natural rights. The ability to defend yourself is one of them. The ability to be on some sort of equal ground with another individual which is trying to take away something from you, infringe on your own rights, seems to be inherently within that right. In other words, we don't want to get to a situation where the only people that have guns are people that shouldn't have guns. And that is what's going to happen if you have these crazy laws. So you have to keep looking at that. So if there's something you're interested in, and all you farmers out there, you see what's going on in Europe. They started to figure out that all of these rules and regulations about fertilizer and cost and some of this green stuff going to ruin their business. Just started thinking about it, found out, had to take action. Don't put anything like that aside. I'll be right back. Oh, yeah. We're all heading out there looking for adventure. Just remember, when adventure finds you sometimes, you better be prepared for it. Because adventure by its very nature is sometimes surprising. Well, let's just jump right into a few things to outrage us here. There is a certain amount of outrage all the time. I try and avoid being outraged constantly because it's too easy to be that way, and it's too hard on you and your body, and certainly your mental attitude. And here's a couple of things I thought we would talk about. Here was one that I really thought I don't know why it surprised me. Remember Jamal Bowman? He's the congressman that threw the fire alarm during the vote in Congress when the Republicans looked like they were going to pass something the Democrats weren't too crazy about. Remember that guy? Remember he thought he was opening the door to go outside by pulling the fire alarm? So right away, he's either not very truthful or not really a genius. I think both things are true. Well, he came out. I mean, they found that he was, by the way, he was a principal, an education person, a principal in a school. Gives you some idea of why people are turning out the way they are. At any rate, so Jamal Bowman had once put up a convicted cop killer on this middle school where he was the principal in their wall of honor and said he stands by his move. You can read all about it. I mean, I put it on my website. You can look at that and read a little more about it. But I also pointed out that he is one of the founders, and this should really put you firmly in his corner, of the hip-hop task force in Congress. Yes, you heard that right. We have the Freedom Caucus, we have the Black Caucus, and I think we have the Hispanic Caucus. And Jamal Bowman felt like that we should have a hip-hop task force in Congress. His idea of that hip-hop music, now I'm sure you guys out there listen to it all the time, so I'm not telling you anything. But for the most part, hip-hop music is sometimes a little, that's what word my mother would use, raunchy. And that's a kind way to put it. But Jamal thinks that we have much to learn from that. And it needs, those lessons need to be introduced into our legislative body. I'll leave that with you to think about that for a little bit. Now just remember, I'm not trying to make you just upset. This is just an idea. This is just how this thing goes. This is where we're at. These are the people in Congress. Ilhan Omar and J. Paul, story came out. Apparently they popped down to Cuba, where I'm sure that they feel they fit right in. At the same time, Soviet ambassador was there. Trump would have done that. First of all, he never would have done that. But if he'd done that, it would have been, oh no, they're conspiring about something. Yeah, I just think that probably wouldn't be true with Trump. With these characters, I don't know what they're doing. The more upsetting possibility is that they don't know what they're doing either, but they're going to do it good and hard. So whatever is going on in Congress is something that 20 years ago would have been extremely difficult to imagine. And 30 years ago would have been impossible to imagine. Or if some of what was going on, no one would be proud enough of it to just announce it to the world. Now we have it. Now, I know I've said in the past that it's important to let idiots speak, because how else are you going to know they're idiots? Especially when you want to know right away. And most of these people, if you let them say what they think, it kind of tips you off to what's going on with them. So I'm not against this stuff coming out. But the second part of it is that whatever happened to shame, whatever happened to being the kind of criminal or idiot or whatever you want to say who isn't proud of it? Say you're corrupt and you're in government, and shouldn't you be a little embarrassed? I guess not. Or if you sound like a fool. Now, we all know that fools oftentimes don't know what they sound like. But my word, The fact that you don't think that some of these things are controversial and you have so little respect for the voting public, or certainly the citizenry, that you're just going to go ahead and keep doing them, that's a change. Like I've said before, we've always had corruption in government. We've always had idiots in government. We've always had nincompoops and incompetence. But they at least tried to hide it. They didn't wear it like a badge of honor. And that's what we have now. I mean, for instance, take a look at this worn-out Muppet we have as a president. I've heard some of the most ridiculous defenses of this guy's ineptitude that I thought I'd ever hear. His press secretary, Jean-Pierre, said the other day that he didn't take a cognitive test when he went to have his physical because he doesn't need it. Sharp as a tack, that one. Yes, indeed. Come on. I mean, just, have the courtesy of looking embarrassed when you say stuff like that. It would make me feel a lot better, as opposed to having this challenging look like, how dare you? I'd prefer you to say it, if you're going to say it, and be just, a little embarrassed. It doesn't, all that's gone away. That probably tells us a lot about where we're at. Here's another little story that might be helpful to you. The West End in London has a play. That's the West End is sort of like, well, it's like their Broadway or they're slightly off Broadway in London. And it's a play, and it stars, Kit Harington. For those of you that were fans of Game of Thrones, which is one of the only shows that you could have been a tremendous fan of until the last season or season and a half, in which case it managed to go back and erase everything you almost liked about that show because it was so bad. Nevertheless, he played Jon Snow. You know nothing, Jon Snow. He's in a play, and that's not really the important part of it. The play has nights set aside where white theatergoers aren't welcome because they're all black audience nights. Here's a little quote. Blackout nights are the purposeful creation of an environment in which an all-black identifying audience... What do you mean all-black identifying audience? Everything is an identity now? You just do it yourself? And yet, if it's something you think it'd be fun, like, I'd like to imagine that I was 22, no, you can't do that. Anyway. And why not? If you can change everything else just by thinking about it. Anyway, the audience can experience and discuss an event in the performing arts, film, athletic, and cultural spaces free from the white gaze. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. That sounds a little bit like some sort of weapon. Maybe it's like the heat ray that Superman shoots out of his eyes. I don't know. Apparently the white gaze, that's not so good. And, once again, they publish it. I thought discrimination, I know this is I sound like a fool. Discrimination, I thought, based on race, was something that people didn't want. Well, of course, that's changed now, isn't it? I mean, this is stupid. It's not really there's nothing much else to say about it. It's a stupid thing to do. It's a bizarre virtue signaling nonsense. And I'm not sure what kind of virtue signaling that we fall upon, where signaling that you are dividing people by races before they can do anything is a virtue. That's a very confusing situation. But that's where things have gone. Here's another one. This is on the website, too. Hulking 280-pound student. This is like I think, a high school student. 280 pounds. It's over 6 feet tall. Beats elderly teacher to the ground with instructor claiming school refused to arrest unruly man-child. Apparently, when I read the story, this fellow was a substitute teacher and tried to get the screen, I think it was a Chromebook, this kid to put it away, something like that, and got pummeled for it. Wow. As I said, the kids are not all right. When did you think you would ever hear about that? Now, also, I'm the first to say that we have a situation where we have national news now. I mean, everything that happens in some small town in Missouri can easily get spread all over the country. And there's always been oddball things. But we're seeing this more and more. Schools will not protect the teachers and other students if there are certain qualifications on the other student are met, if they check some boxes. Or they're just plain afraid to do anything because they're afraid the parents will get mad at them, somebody will get mad at them, or they'll get some bad publicity. Or, God forbid, they don't think they should do anything. I don't know. I actually have a good story here when we come back about a California judge did something right. I know. I'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. And we do have the situation well in hand. Well, from our end, anyway. So I promised you at the end of the last segment we'd say something, or we'd go over something more positive, since it seems like so much of the news is, shall we say, negative, or kind of, I think as the kids say, downer. So we will. But first, I think it's incumbent upon me to give you a bit of just a little historical knowledge that you can corner someone and say, did you know? Because we'll... It is interesting, but I like to throw these tidbits in. It's something I was looking at earlier today. Now we have the term hours, right? Like this show is an hour. Hours, where does that come from? Well, if you try and decide how people told time before, I don't know, smartwatches, Google, whatever the case may be, you go all the way back to your ancient Greeks. Yeah, the ancient Greeks back there had some good ideas. And they were some of the first people to divide the day and night, let's say, the period into two 12-hour sections, which they called hora in their language, which is where we get hours. There you go. Sometimes we use these words, we don't know where they came from. Yes, hora and hours is how we ended up with it. The difference with the Greeks was that they tried to divide the day by daytime. In other words, when it was light out, sunrise, sunset. And so at certain times of the year, as we all know, the days are longer or shorter. So they would change the length of time that a hora was based on the time of year. So if it was a time when the day lasted longer, then the horas were longer. If it was a day when was during the time of year when it changed back to where it was shorter, they shortened it. Now, remember, they're down in the Mediterranean. So there is a change, but it's not as marked a change as it gets as you go further north or south. So there you go. There's that little bit of knowledge that you can take somebody and say, hey, I'd like to just get you in a corner and talk about things that, probably make you feel like I'm trying to lecture you. It is interesting. I do think it's important that we have some idea about where our language comes from time to time. Okay, let's talk about something that is, I think, a positive result. And it is in California. I know. When was the last time you heard something positive in California? Well, a judge in California was looking over some prosecutions associated with a fairly violent demonstration in California in 2017. Now, there was a, quote, free speech rally, and members of this group called Rise Against Movement, which were described, of course, in the articles that you see, as a far-right white nationalist group engaged in violence against left-wing groups like Antifa. However, one of those groups that they are apparently are fighting with, which was called By Any Means Necessary, BAM, B-A-M-N. So it's RAM versus BAM. So what the judge was saying, that if you look at what was happening at the time, both sides of this were very culpable, and that he was surprised that only the right-wing people were being charged. He said, let's see, Members of the Rise Against the Movement, a far-right white nationalist group, engaged in violence against left-wing groups. Okay, it says, Antifa and related far-left groups decided they need to shut this down. They came prepared for violence, bringing weapons, including pepper spray, fireworks, knives, and homemade bombs. This is a judge by the name of Cormac J. Carney, the U.S. District Court, the Central District of California. So he is a federal judge. And he wrote that, last week, February 21st. And they use these weapons as well as their bodies against Trump supporters and law enforcement. Now, what he's saying is, it was clear from the evidence submitted in the charging documents, apparently, that the government did not prosecute similarly situated individuals associated with Antifa and other far-left groups. And there was no difference, at least in the behaviors. This is the point he was making. And so he felt it was manifestly unfair and perhaps a violation of some civil rights to selectively prosecute people like this based on their apparent political position. So that is a very positive thing. Now, I'm sure that's going to get ran around all over the place. And what's really interesting about it is that the idea of prosecutorial discretion is a concept we've had for a long time. And it is an important concept because it allows the prosecution to decide ultimately what to charge, what to ask for in terms of punishment, although they don't get to dictate it, and who gets a plea agreement and what sort that it is. And this is an executive branch function. The legislature, outside of making the laws, aren't supposed to get particularly involved in this. Now, they could change that a little bit with some new legislation. The courts aren't supposed to get particularly involved in this either, unless they see something particularly egregious that they believe might rise to the level of a constitutional violation, which apparently this judge did. I haven't read the complete opinion yet, so I don't know. I mean, he's issued the opinion, and I'm curious what's going to happen with it. But at any rate, it shows that there's some people that are aware that are serious problems with the charging decisions that prosecutors in some of these places are making. That's a very bad thing. I mean, we know that. To nakedly use the power of the state against people predominantly because of their political affiliation or their beliefs is something that is so undermining to the republic as to just really be tunneling under one of the pillars of it and can cause a collapse. So I think this decision is a positive thing. And it came out of California, so I thought we should talk about it just to let you know that there are people out there who do care about what's happening. And some of them are on the bench. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but every so often. So I thought I would bring that up. Well, so let's see. I have some other notes I wanted to bring up for you guys. Now, we talked a little bit earlier in the show about some of the legislation in Colorado that was coming down from the legislature. They were trying to get through to increase the requirements for concealed weapons carry licenses, then also try to exclude lots of places from concealed carry, licensed concealed carry, and the requirement that you, if you have a firearm, have liability insurance. And we discussed how that's an interesting concept from the beginning. Like, can you get liability insurance that's going to cover that specifically? And what if you don't have any liability insurance because you don't own a home? Because that's where a lot of it comes from for this kind of thing. If you're a renter, unless you have renter's insurance, which, by the way, I would suggest is a good idea. But if you don't, you probably don't have any coverage for anything like this. So how are you going to get covered? There's no discussion about that. As usual, no one even thinks, or I suspect cares about the ramifications of that, because the bill really is to just make it difficult, expensive, and time-consuming to even get a permit or to own a firearm. All of these attacks, collateral attacks, in other words, coming at it from different sides instead of meeting it head-on, which is to say, we don't like guns, we don't want you to have them. We like guns if we control them, but if you do, we don't want you to have them. Now, that's a straightforward attack. But no, I mean, there's not enough inherent honesty in gun control advocates to bring that out. They just, once again, Well, we make sure the training, this and that. And like we said earlier, show me some data where this is a problem. Where the events where people with concealed weapons permits have been breaking the law or randomly shooting in a way that they can't hit what they're aiming at and bringing down innocent civilians. Now, we haven't seen that, but we do see it with a lot of gangbangers in some of the big cities and things like that who carry guns a lot, but they don't have any proficiency with them. And so when they do employ them, they're just as likely to injure or kill innocent bystanders as they are the person they're trying to hit. I suspect that you'll find nothing of any real intrinsic value in any research that's been done about these bills, because that's not really what they're about. They just want to sound like common sense gun laws. Common sense anymore, when I hear it, is like when I hear someone says, I follow the science. I hate the fact that it makes my ears perk up to, what's going on here? Same thing when I say common sense, some common sense blank laws. That's become the mantra of a lot of people on the left. We have a lot of that going on here, folks, in the state of Colorado and in several other states, that these tangential and collateral attacks on gun rights and 2 or 3 other things to either make them too expensive or difficult, or ammunition too expensive, or make you register to buy ammunition. I mean, there's all these things out there in other states, as well as to some extent Colorado, like we've been talking about, that has to be countered. And if you're not calling, if you're in one of the states here, in Colorado especially, about this stuff, and you have a feeling on it, and you're not calling your representative or your state senator and let them know how you feel, I mean, even if you don't think it's going to do any good, and I think it will do some good, you have to make your voice heard. If you don't participate, then it's difficult for you to say later on that you don't like it, even if you don't. Remember the old saying, just because you don't take an interest in politics does not mean that politics will not take an interest in you. That's not a good thing most of the time. So get out there and make yourself heard on things like this, no matter where you're at. Find your representative or your state senator or whoever it is, depending on where you're at, that's saying things that you find crazy, or even if you support. Let them know. Let them know that they're not living outside of the spotlight, because that's what happens. They think that they're no longer under scrutiny, that unless they come home and tell you what they're doing, you don't know. And then if you do find out something, they can always say, well, I fought against it, I really did. You have no idea. Nobody talked to them about it, and sometimes they don't care. I know it's a terrible way to think about representative government, but it does seem to be something that happens all the time. So please spend a little time getting in contact with your representatives. That's why they're called representatives. They're supposed to listen to you and represent your views and viewpoints. I know it's a little bit depressing because you feel like that doesn't happen, but it is important. All right, let's talk about something else here that I wanted to bring up, and that was the homeless problem in various places, or the unhoused. Oh, by the way, did you guys see that now the Biden administration refers to illegal aliens as newcomers? Newcomers. Gee, that's a pleasant-sounding word, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of true. I mean, they are newcomers, but that's sort of like saying when someone comes in, is trespassing in your house, it's a newcomer. I don't think if someone comes bolting to the window of your house without your invitation that you're going to say, oh, it's a newcomer. I don't think that's how that works, but apparently we are at the border. But this is really hurting regular citizens because it's depriving them of many services that the cities that are welcoming these characters in have to provide or are providing. Some of it they don't have to provide, they're just doing it. And, of course, Denver is one of the big places that's going on. And it's kind of shocking. In Colorado, we're about 13th in terms of the population per 10,000 state residents. We have, I think, about 17.9, it looks like in this list I'm looking at, homeless people for every 10,000. Now, that sounds like a lot, and it is, but California has 43.7 for every 10,000 state residents. Vermont has 43, Oregon 42, and Hawaii, oddly enough, 41. Now, I understand New York and Washington being the next, but Hawaii, how are they getting there? I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, I don't think people are living there. They're in those kinds of numbers. They're just becoming unhoused. I don't have enough data on that. But because of that, we're seeing a real loss of services because they're being adjusted. People who are homeless, in Colorado anyway, they estimate about 69% of them are not really living in any shelters or anything like that, that they're essentially hanging out. And Colorado is, like 13th in that, which is surprising when you consider that we don't exactly have mild winters in Colorado. But for some reason, they're here. I remember when this first started, a lot of them came here because we had legal marijuana. We all know that that's so. Of course, that's not true. Yes, of course, it's true. All right. So let's look at the cost of this, because I pulled this up too. The Common Sense Institute did a great study on how much this stuff costs. And it's shocking. In December 2022 to the present, this is a Common Sense Institute study, Denver has spent an estimated $42 million caring for migrants. Mayor Johnson, who's the new mayor over there, projected the city would spend up to $180 million, 1/10 of its budget, by the end of 2024. And, many of you know this, he asked the Denver City Council to make budget cuts to other departments, such as Parks and the Department of Motor Vehicles. If the mayor's cost projections, according to this study, played out in real time, the city's spending on migrants would equal the combined budgets of the Department of Parks and Recreation, Cultural Facilities, and the Office of Human Services. This is not even coming into what's going on in some of the hospitals over there in terms of the impact on their budgets. $180 million. And who's going to be burdened by this in terms of services? Well, the taxpayers. And, of course, the secondary, and sometimes maybe the primary, depending on your situation, is what's going on with all of the folks that we have no idea who they are that are in the country and wandering around these neighborhoods. Don't know where they came from, don't know who they are, don't know why they're here, but there they are. And there's no question that it contributes to rising crime of all sorts. I mean, I think we see that very clearly. But the cost is getting to be astronomical. So I thought that was very interesting. And, man, I don't know how long we can do. Well, we can't do that. We can't do it now, much less something into the future. Oh, also, I wanted to mention on the these gun permit things, well, war on firearms in Colorado, that in 2023, when last year, there were 25,000 new concealed carry permits issued in Colorado. That's new ones, right? That's not all. That's just new ones. And for the most part, these folks are exceptionally law-abiding. Once again, some of these laws that we're seeing come in are a remedy in search of a problem. Concealed weapons permit, folks are not out there blazing away at things. This is something that is put out there to restrict gun ownership or make it more difficult or make the state get more involved in it. That's just the long and short of it. And like I said earlier, I wish they'd just say it and get it out there instead of pretending that, it's just common sense. No, it's not common sense. Common sense is that the state acts when there's a problem, not acts because it doesn't like something, even though there's no problem, because there's a purely political side to it. It's shocking how bold they are about this stuff, I got to tell you. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting was, and I think this is interesting because of the way it's written. Most of you know that a couple days ago, the Supreme Court agreed to hear Trump's appeal about his immunity that he has asserted. Now, when the Supreme Court decided to take this up on last Wednesday, I guess, that's going to cause a pretty substantial delay in anything that can happen because the proceedings are being stayed until a decision is made on this. Now, it's been delayed for a while. And I'm reading here from, this is Microsoft News, which MSN, which is just so lefty. The order is a colossal victory for Trump and could potentially allow him to evade criminal responsibility for his attempts to overthrow the 2020 election altogether. Does that sound like a news article to you? Does that sound like a we report, you decide kind of thing? I don't think so. Evade criminal responsibility for his attempts to overthrow the 2020 election altogether. Gee, that sounds like they've prejudged it a little bit to me. The whole article is like that. The ostensible reason for the court's order putting the initial trial on ice is the court needs time to consider a weak appeal. This is they're deciding that. This is just their editorializing. A weak appeal challenging a ruling. The judge from the judge presiding over the criminal case. What? How you can possibly say this is a news story? That you're trying to inform people. It's from Vox, by the way, Vox.com, which is a far-left site, and Microsoft News puts it up. So there you have. That's the thinking. Does it sound like the decision's already been made in a lot of people's minds about what ought to happen here, and they're mad because the Supreme Court is looking at some legal issues and preventing them from getting their way right now? Oh, yeah. That is exactly what's going on. Now, the immunity argument, I think it's tough. His argument that I've seen is a fairly broad application of immunity for acts in office. I don't think that you can do that. I think that there probably is some immunity, and we've never really addressed it because nobody's tried any of this nonsense before on former presidents. There probably is something there. Is it a blanket? I don't see how that could be. And so I do think the appeal has some issues. But there are some issues that I would love to see the Supreme Court address. That's why it's there. This is a very important issue to the people of the United States. I'm sorry that it upsets the left if they want to consider it. So that's happening out there too. We will see how that goes. It's going to be a while. Going to be some months before they hear it. You know, the Supreme Court actually is a little busy doing this and that. So they can't just jump on everything. They're trying to. I mean, they also have this case that's coming up from Illinois where we had that goofy judge decide that you can throw Trump off the ballot because he's insurrection. Even though it's quite clear that the 14th Amendment in this concept is not applicable to the president, period. Much less the fact that there's no proof that he engaged in insurrection or even a good definition per se of insurrection in the 14th Amendment. So this judge apparently is just trying to get people to, know who she is, I guess. Little PR. Who knows? Folks, keep aware. Get hold of your representatives.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
Listen,
if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.